Chris McCarthy Show on 1420 WBSM.
And good morning. Welcome back to the Chris McCarthy Show. I want to tell you, as I promised from the start, we will now be joined by Congressman William Keating. Good morning, Congressman. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Chris.
How are things down in D.C.?
Well, they're fine. We're in, this is school vacation, so for many people, this is the time for the district because so many families go traveling just like they do in other jobs. So it's a week we're at home, but thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no, listen, we're really happy to have you on. So last week we talked about some of the work you've done on opioids. That's an ongoing issue here in this district, in this country, and certainly here on this program, we want to bring as much attention to it as possible. So I wanted to just get your thoughts. I've written a blog on it this morning that we need to get tougher on these drug dealers. They arrested a person for selling drugs in the Yarmouth Drug Treatment Center parking lot. Great job by the Yarmouth Police Department. Incredible you'd have such audacity going on, but that's because of the profits involved. Just wanted your thoughts on that and some thoughts on the other things you're doing, Congressman, for the opioid crisis.
Well, it's an issue I've been dealing with actually for over a decade and a half. It started when I was a district attorney. We would find, as we investigated deaths, that a lot of the people had no criminal background whatsoever, and it became apparent that these are people that had become addicted through prescriptions, which the Center for Disease Control has then shown that 80% of the people opioid addicted came from those prescriptions. So that involvement led me through to some of the work we're doing in Congress now, and as much as we've worked to address many of the issues, make real improvements in the area, recognize the way it has to be treated in a better fashion, not as a criminal alone, but rather as a public health issue as well. We've learned a great deal. However, the landscape has changed, Chris. It's and the latest scourge that we have is the use of fentanyl, carfentanil, and we're seeing it not only in opioids. We're seeing fentanyl introduced along with cocaine, even mixed with marijuana, and fentanyl is also being counterfeited, particularly by the Chinese, where they're making counterfeit Percocet pills, other pills. They give the appearance, but they're actually fentanyl. And the spike in death that's hurt our area in particular has been, a direct cause of the fentanyl introduction. So we're moving to strengthen the federal guidelines for tougher sentencing guidelines for the distribution of fentanyl, and the state of Massachusetts has moved in that regard to upping the penalties to just try and create a greater deterrent. But I must tell you that one of the other challenges, and I've worked with our DEA and Homeland Security people in both a classified setting and a non-classified setting to talk about the issues, and one of the challenges we have now is the use of mail, United States Postal Service, FedEx, UPS, in delivering a lot of this. People will go on encrypted areas of the Internet, and they'll be able to order many of these things, so that that presents a new challenge for just stopping things at the border.
It's an ongoing fight, Congressman. One of the not necessarily most vulnerable populations, but certainly a population that we all owe a debt of gratitude to is our veterans population. What have you been doing in regards to veterans and helping them with this issue?
Well, sadly, the statistics for veterans is higher than the national average in terms of dealing with these issues, but it's easily understandable. So many of the veterans have had orthopedic injuries, have dealt with brain trauma, these kind of physical injuries that medical miracles keep people alive with today.
Right.
Create great challenge. And so the Veterans Administration, in their treatment, had really weighed the scales in favor of the people treating it, getting credit. Well, if you just give a prescription of opioids, then you're treating it. And that's the way they would be graded, so to speak.
Okay.
We've changed that, and I've gone further. I wanted to make sure there's mandatory education for prescribers in the Veterans Administration each year on these opioid issues. Even though in the state of Massachusetts that's required, so many of the veterans in our area go down to Providence, and that's another state. It doesn't have the requirements, so this would require that as well. We're also working to to see what alternatives are there other than opioids, and making sure that some of the new technology that's available is there and as an alternative to opioid treatment. So what's really a better story is they have changed their policies in the Veterans Administration. Another piece of legislation I tried to do is move forward with their plan and sharing that on the private side. I think in Massachusetts we're ahead of the curve, but there's so many other areas of the country that are not. And so by the Veterans Administration sharing that with those parts of the country, we'll be bringing a better treatment protocol as well. But all of this is a very tough lift, given the changes that are occurring, the way people are getting these drugs, and the deadliness of the drugs.
Right.
And so one thing we are really encouraging is telling people that use other drugs, whether it's marijuana or cocaine, they could indeed be laced with fentanyl, but also putting more money into making sure the prevention and the treatment is there. We have great treatment facilities in our area, and I think with the money that went through with this latest budget, places that are up, running, and working well will get more of that money. At least that's the way it was tilted before, so that that money could be used more effectively.
Excellent, excellent. We're speaking with Congressman William Keating, who's our congressman here in southeastern Massachusetts. I just want to shift gears here a little bit with you, or a lot of bit, to the indictment of the Russian bad actors who got involved in our election cycle. Of course, for people who don't know, you have an involvement with Russia, not in a bad way, but you've worked with their folks, particularly on the Boston Marathon bombing, and I know you've traveled over there. Give us some of your specific insights into what's going on here, Congressman.
Well, I've traveled to Russia twice. I'm not planning on getting there. They probably have banned me by this point from going there, as they have some other officials. But while we did have information sharing that was indeed in their best interest on the Boston Marathon bombing, which incidentally has a relevancy to what occurred in the tragedy in Parkland as well. One of the things our year-long study showed, and one of the things we pushed the FBI on is, and it's relevant for the tragedy that occurred there, as well as the marathon bombings and other terrorist attacks. Some of them the information isn't public, but there's a portion of their investigation that is a threat assessment. And we have so few FBI agents doing that, tens of thousands of threat assessments, that's not getting the priority it should.
Okay.
I think it was handled not well in the Parkland situation in Florida.
Right.
It wasn't handled well in the Boston Marathon bombing. I have pressed them, and they say they don't need in testimony and in classified suggestions. I think they need more people, and they have to work with local police for a multiplier effect. And this is what might come out of that shooting, that tragedy, is the fact that the FBI should change the way they're dealing with that threat assessment procedure. I discussed it with Director Comey, who was beginning to undertake that assessment before he was fired. So we're going to go back and make that a priority now. So that's the side of Russia that I dealt with in part. But the other side of Russia, they committed an attack on our country, a cyber attack that not only we're learning had great sophistication and a great deal of money and resources behind it, directly coming out of Russia, but they've been on American soil dealing with this, and that's what this recent indictment detailed in great, with great clarity. People that it's public, people should take the time, if they're interested, to read that,
right,
and learn more about how they were doing this. We also know, in questioning 2 weeks ago that I had in Congress, that they're into the actual voting apparatus in over 20 states. And in my questioning, I said, can they change the actual voting situation? And the experts I questioned said they could. They could actually take people off. They had the ability to take people off the voter list and cause chaos there. And that's why this latest decision to move to paper ballots all through the country is an important one.
Absolutely.
Today, Chris, also, there was another indictment and that's something that bears some watching too. There's a gentleman that was a lawyer that was indicted, and that's an associate with Rick Gates. Now, Rick Gates is the associate of Paul Manafort, who was the Trump campaign chairman for months in the summer. But he also has been indicted on conspiracy and money laundering. So today's most recent indictment is one that bears some watching along this whole line. The person that was charged, his name is Alex Vander Zwaan, and the area that they are investigating deals with Ukraine, money laundering from the Ukraine, and also the Russian involvement in that. And it will bear watching because millions of dollars was spent by the Russians trying to influence activities in the Ukraine. Their former, leader, Yanukovych, is now in Russia. Mm-hmm. He's fled the country with billions of dollars of money. And Paul Manafort was there supporting his regime and promoting his political party for the Russians. So it's another chapter that's unfolding, even one that we learned this morning.
Congressman, what do you make of the fact that they started this operation way back in 2014? What does that, as a former prosecutor and investigator, tell you?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of the activities came to light during that period, not just in the United States, but with our Western allies, and particularly Europe. They have been doing this in Europe. They still do it in Europe. They did it in the French election. Mm-hmm. They actually gave, as reported, over $10 million to Marine Le Pen in France, who had ties with Russia and wanted to have separation from the U.S. and the rest of the West. They got involved in Chancellor Merkel's campaign. They're getting involved in the campaigns of democratic countries. And this has been something that they have planned, but the level of involvement that occurred, as detailed by the indictments by Director Mueller this weekend, is extraordinary. So much more than I think the public realized. Things we were briefed on that are now public. So they're going to do it again. Every single intelligence agency in our country says they're going to do it again. They were even involved in trying to create division around the tragedy of the Parkland shootings. So they don't stop, and they won't stop. We've got to take action. The Congress, with only 2 members of the Senate, it was 98-2, and I think only 3 members of the House voting the other way, voted to put strong sanctions on Russia, sanctions that would go to the oligarchs who are really the people that are funding this and dealing with it. So even on those individuals. And the president has decided just in the last 10 days, he's not going to institute those sanctions directed upon him by Congress. So there's strong bipartisan concern and a little bit of anger at these sanctions not being imposed. And I think with the revelations that are now in the public, there'll be more effort to make sure we're, in effect, striking back at these Russians. The worst thing we can do is to let them just continue to do what they're doing unanswered.
We're speaking with Congressman William Keating here for the Southeastern Massachusetts District. Congressman, just playing devil's advocate here for the Russians, which is not my normal posture. What about what the United States does in foreign elections? Do we play a part in foreign elections, and do they have a case to say, well, you guys do that to us?
Well, what they're criticizing us for is trying to deal with free speech and getting information. The way the Russians run, they don't have these problems in Russia.
No.
Because if there's an opponent to Putin, he either ends up in prison,
right,
he ends up poisoned, or he just disappears. That's the way they deal with things in Russia. What the U.S. is involved with across the whole world is to try and be advocates for free speech, advocates for democratic elections. And, of course, in those countries, because we have that ideology, because we have those core beliefs, this runs into what they try to do. They look at it as interference. We're not targeting Russia. We're just saying that as part of what we believe as a country, what we know is better for our own security back at home, it's better to have democracy be available to countries. We don't impose it, but we try to encourage it, not only with our example, but with our ability to advocate for it. They view that as an enemy faction.
Yes,
we view it as the promotion of democracy worldwide.
And for people who don't realize it, they literally do kill people. That the gentleman who was poisoned with radioactive device they put into a cup of tea in a restaurant in Britain, in London, and he was poisoned. I mean, they go all over the world to kill people.
When they deal with terrorists, like in the North Caucasus and Chechnya area, they just don't have a system of trials, or they just go kill anyone that's suspected. It's incredible, compared to what we experience in our country, and that's just the way they have acted and will continue to act. Remains difficult for us to change those actions, other than by setting an example ourselves.
Well, hey, Congressman, I want to thank you again. I know you have a busy day. I want to thank you for joining us here on the Chris McCarthy Show. Really appreciate it. Look forward to speaking with you probably next week as well, and you can give us an update on what's going on down in Washington.
Well, Chris, thank you for doing this. And one theme that I think we'll try to tie together from time to time, there are people listening that might say, well, this is interesting, what's going on in the world. How does it affect us?
Right.
Well, I can tell you, as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, this does have effect on our security here at home, and I hope we'll continue to engage in these kind of discussions so that we can tell people these things come home to roost in a way that threatens our own security at home. So I really appreciate you giving the time to put some light on this.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Congressman. Well, listen, have a great day, and I'll talk with your staff. We'll get you back here next week.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day. All right, folks. We're going to take a very quick break. When we come back, we'll go to the phones. 508-996-0500. Get on the line right now. We'll come back.
1420 WBSM, where New Bedford turns for breaking news.